Excellencies, today's debate is timely as Resolution 4682, which created the humanitarian system as we know it today, turns 30. The importance of this resolution cannot be overstated. It was and remains a commitment by the international community to protect the world's most vulnerable people and to empower and enable those who would help. I'm glad to say that many of the institutions, partnerships, and principles they nurtured remain with us today, albeit with changes and adaptations to reflect the times. While we mark this year 30th year anniversary, our discussion today is far from positive. Humanitarian concerns remain prevalent throughout the world. In fact, the 2022 Global Humanitarian Overview noted that nearly 300 million people in 63 countries are in need of humanitarian assistance. The United Nations and partners will target assistance for 183 million of those most needed, the highest ever. This assistance comes at a financial cost. The Global Humanitarian Overview calls for $41 billion, the highest appeal ever made. I urge the international community to support this appeal. We have a moral obligation to protect and provide for the most vulnerable. Let us live up to these ideals. Excellencies, our discussion today is focused on how we can strengthen the coordination of disaster and humanitarian relief assistance. On this, I would emphasize three key points. First, we cannot ignore the impact of COVID-19. It is widely known that those furthest behind suffered disproportionately more during this pandemic. The LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, already burdened with debt and structural deficiencies, have now had to face yet another crisis. For those already on the precipice of humanitarian need, the pandemic may have been the final push. We know full well, with data from the World Bank, that hundreds of millions were forced into extreme poverty and food insecurity. Let us use the COVID-19 recovery to address these concerns if we are talking about coordination here in the recovery from the pandemic. It is our first port of entry to help millions of people. Second, vaccine equity must be prioritized above all else. We are facing yet another variant of COVID-19 that is a direct result of our inability to vaccinate the world. How many more variants will there be before one comes along? This is more lethal or entirely resistant to our vaccines. We risk going right back to square one and enduring yet more lockdowns if we do not move quickly to stop this pandemic. 2022 must be the year that we do this. Some of the poorest and most vulnerable countries are among the most underserved on vaccine access. Let us protect them. Let us protect our world. Third, the pandemic, like so many other challenges, has unduly impacted on women and girls. We see this in the shadow pandemic of domestic violence and in the fact that women and girls have been disproportionately impacted by socio-economic impacts, such as the loss of jobs and livelihoods or of access to education. I encourage all member states to prioritize the plight of women and girls in your considerations around humanitarian coordination and response. Fourth, we must not forget the larger climate crisis. The humanitarian community are also on the front lines of climate impacts, responding to disasters brought on by hurricanes, droughts, floods, and other natural hazards that have seen an increase in intensity and frequency. Without action to address climate change, we will see only more climate-related disasters and more climate-related migration. Even if the world we are to act now to address climate change, we can still anticipate decades of impacts due to our delays. It is imperative that humanitarian and relief agencies are closely linked to efforts to support adaptation and to help prevent and prepare for natural disasters. Excellencies, I ask also that we prioritize the safety and security of humanitarian personnel in our discussions and in any actions that are taken. Too many have lost their lives or been injured while attempting to help their fellow women and men. In 2021, at least 1,100 humanitarian workers have been killed. This is simply unacceptable. Humanitarian workers deserve our gratitude, but they also deserve the resources, skills, and equipment to be safe. Let us not let them down. All member states must give full support to humanitarian access and ensure full safety and security of personnel. While it is essential that we meet humanitarian funding needs, it is also important that we strengthen the partnerships and collaboration needed to achieve success. Development partners, international financial institutions, and the private sector all have a role to play in reducing vulnerability and strengthening resilience and response. My dear friends, COVID-19 may have set back progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, but this does not have to be the case if we respond and recovery appropriately. Addressing humanitarian needs is key to that. This is up to us to act. Let us do so decisively, with conviction and compassion. I thank you.